Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. Welcome to today's webinar, Nonprofit Tech Trends Leaders Need to Know About. My name is Kara Godleski, and I am the Marketing and Events Coordinator here at Nonprofit Hub. And I'm so glad y'all could join us for another great webinar. We're just going to take a few minutes before we get started, wait for people to kind of log in, get settled, get their cup of coffee ready before we dive in for today's session. In the meantime, feel free to drop who you are, where you're from, what your organization is in the chat. We love to hear from y'all, see where everybody's coming in from today. And we're going to do a little bit of an icebreaker question too. We are wondering, what are you most excited about for fall? I'm in Huntsville, Alabama, so I'm excited about the weather cooling off a little bit. And football season is about to start, college football, Roll Tide, if anybody's a college football fan out there. So that's what I'm excited about this fall. So yeah, feel free to drop it in the chat. Hi, Nicole from Connecticut. Sally from Indiana. Awesome. Ooh, Tori says she's excited for picking apples in the grape harvest. Oh yeah, I love that. I love picking apples and baking apple crisp. That's always fun too.
Has anyone spotted the
Hey,
pumpkin
Shelby.
spice latte in the wild yet?
Oh no, is it back now?
I haven't seen it yet, but sometimes it seems like they start in like August.
People love their pumpkin spice. People definitely love that one a lot.
Or hate it. You can go either way.
Yeah, I don't really love it either. Like, I get why people do like it, but I mean, I just like coffee with cream. So I'm kind of bored.
I feel like it's not quite cool enough yet for pumpkin spice.
Yeah, I agree. Oh man. Awesome. I see some people are excited for pumpkins though. Squash, the colors of leaves changing. Oh yeah. Well, thank y'all for so much for joining us again. If you're just rolling in now, you are in the right place. If you're here to know about tech trends and what you need to know about them. So thank y'all for joining us. Before we jump in, we're just going to go over a few housekeeping items. The webinar is going to be recorded, so don't worry about that. If you have to step out for a second, you'll get a follow-up email with all the resources and recording after the webinar today. You're also very much encouraged to chat with us. Feel free to answer our poll questions and ask questions because we will be doing a live Q&A at the end. So feel free to drop in all your questions. If you do engage and ask questions and participate and stay for the whole duration of the session, you'll be entered into our giveaway. We will be giving away a free course of your choice. So if you stay and chat, you might have the option to win a free Nonprofit Hub course. We have some certificate courses. We have some ones on marketing, new to nonprofits. I mean, we have a good variety of them. So yeah, it's a fun little giveaway we're going to have, and the giveaway winner will be notified this afternoon. Also, I want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, Community IT. We are so lucky to have them joining us today. They offer IT support services for nonprofits who want to outsource some of their IT support. They help nonprofits plan, implement, and maintain dependable technology. They can take care of your IT system so you can accomplish your mission. So shout out to them and thank you. And a quick shout out to our platform partner, FireSpring, that provides strategic guidance through creative marketing and solutions to help nonprofits prosper. So with that being said, I will introduce our hosts for today, our presenters for today. We have Matt and Johan with us, and we're so excited to have them here. Matt is their Chief Technology Advisor at Community IT. He has quite a background in technology. He has very extensive knowledge on computer science, computer information systems. So he's going to be a great guide for us today. And Johan, he's always been interested in using technologies as a force for good and how to improve the world. So that really fits into the nonprofit mission and how those kind of things really can coincide, how you can use tech for good. So we're so excited to have them join us today and dive into these tech trends that we need to know about. So without further ado, I'll let y'all take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Kara.
Yeah.
So I think actually want to go back to, here, I'll make it go back to our intro. Okay, great. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this Ask the Experts panel on top 10 technology trends and tips that nonprofit need to know, especially nonprofit leadership. So we're so excited that you're here. If you're not familiar with our webinars, we're going to discuss technology that nonprofit executives, staff members, board members need to know. And we'll talk about it while defining the terminology and the lingo. So you'll be able to go back and talk to your IT director or IT providers about these tools and strategies and trends that we're expecting to continue to influence nonprofit technology. If you're running your own nonprofit, maybe a startup, we're going to talk also about tools you can use right now and strategies and just ways to think about the interaction of technology with your nonprofit mission. So the learning objectives for today are that after this session, you'd be able to describe 10 major nonprofit trends and tips, learn the terminology and definitions that are common, understand the role of executives and staff in managing IT outcomes and strategic planning, even if you are not the IT person, and know where to go for some additional resources on nonprofit tech. So as Kara mentioned, we're going to be sending out an email after this with some links, and we have a website that you can go to where we have a lot of free resources as well. So I want to make sure everyone knows that Community IT is vendor agnostic. This presentation, we're going to be discussing some specific tools, but we wouldn't make recommendations except to our clients when we know what their business needs are that are more specific. But we, we want to share with you like some basic things that are out there. And yes, as Kara said, we encourage you to submit your questions and comments through the chat feature, but we probably won't be able to get to everything, so you can always contact us afterward to follow up. So Johan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to speak with you all. My name is Johann Hammerstrom. I'm the CEO at Community IT. I've been with Community IT for almost 23 years. So it's been so long that when I first started doing IT support, the internet was something you accessed over a telephone line, and software was something you installed from a CD or a floppy disk. So I've seen a lot of changes in the world of technology in my career. And this is a particularly exciting time for nonprofits as they use technology to accomplish their mission. So that's something that we're really passionate about at Community IT, and something that we're really looking forward to talking with you all about today.
Great. Welcome. My name is Matt Eshleman. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Community IT. I've been with the organization for full-time, a little over 20 years, and in my role as CTO, really responsible for driving our technology strategy and tools that we use to manage about 6,000 endpoints across our 170 nonprofit clients, and also work to develop our cybersecurity strategy and implementation. So looking forward to talking about how some of those things are carried out today, and looking forward to the conversation and any questions that we get as we go along.
Great, thanks, Matt. And so my name's Carolyn, and I'm the Marketing and Outreach Director for Community IT. So I'm happy to help with this presentation and help our experts. Before we begin, if you're not familiar with Community IT, a little bit more about us. We are a 100% employee-owned managed services provider. So we provide outsourced IT support. We work exclusively with nonprofits, and our mission is to help nonprofits accomplish your missions through the effective use of technology. We serve nonprofits across the United States. We've been doing this for over 20 years. We are technology experts, and we are consistently given the MSP 501 recognition for being a top MSP, which is an honor we received again in 2022. So we have a lot of free resources on our website, including videos, articles, free downloads. We have a weekly podcast on technology topics for nonprofits. And we really just think the more nonprofits learn about nonprofit IT, the better you can accomplish your mission. All right, so we're going to go to the agenda, which looks like a lot, so don't worry. It's a lot to take in, but you're in the right place. We're going to break it down for you and talk about what you need to know to match up your business needs with your tech needs at any stage of growth of your nonprofit. So if you have an IT department, an IT director, if you have outsourced IT, as a nonprofit leader, you still need to know some of these basic concepts and be thoughtful about your IT strategy. And that's going to give your organization an advantage and maybe even keep you from some financial problems if you have a cyberware attack, that sort of thing. So we're going to divide our talk today up into 4 sections. Johan is going to start us out with a quick overview of basics around budgeting for IT, which I think is something we all need to jump into and know how to think about as an opportunity, strategic decisions, and also just ways to understand the costs. Then we're going to talk a little bit about long-term trends you can expect over the next few years. And then Matt is here, our CTO, to talk about cybersecurity, insurance, and how to protect your nonprofit. And then to wrap it up, Johan and Matt are going to touch on some changes to office operations that we've seen since the start of the pandemic, and we really do expect to continue to grow in importance. So it's a big agenda with a lot to cover, and we're going to be sharing resources at the end. So to begin, Johan is going to talk about budgeting, and we have a little poll to get things going. So I hope they can watch the poll. Johan, do you want to read the options for people?
Yeah, so go ahead and respond to the poll with the option that best describes your situation. A couple of different scenarios here. Whoever's in charge of your finances, CFO, Director of Finance, just takes last year's amount spent and increases it slightly or keeps it the same. Or do you have number 2, option 2, a leadership team that meets with different departments in your organization to talk about the overall strategy and roadmap for IT and develop a budget from that strategy? Do you not have a budget and just replace things when they break or fix things when they break? That's number 3. Number 4, do you outsource your IT and aren't sure how the money's being spent and are just sort of going in from invoice to invoice? Or number 5, do you not know? You're not sure. So we got about 2/3 of the audience has responded, 3/4. This is great. Thank you all for taking the time to respond to the poll. And right now, I think you can all see the results, but the majority of you have answered, about 1/3 of the respondents have answered number 5, not sure, not applicable. And of the remaining 2/3, only about 15% have an intentionally planned and designed budget. So we'll talk about the importance of the budget, and we're going to provide you with some guidance on things that you can do to develop your IT budget. So we can go ahead and close the poll and move on to the next slide. So budgeting is critical. It's an important and necessary part of using technology effectively and ensuring that IT is meeting the overall needs of the organization and helping your nonprofit organization in accomplishing its mission. And the nature of the budgeting process is really going to vary based on the size and complexity of your organization. So very large organizations with hundreds of staff, multiple departments, sort of sophisticated financial management systems in place are going to have a more complicated and formalized budgeting process. Smaller organizations, maybe your organization only has 10 to 20 staff, are going to have a much less complicated budgeting process. But regardless of the complexity and scope of your budgeting, these are some steps that you see here on the slide that we feel are useful in all scenarios. These 4 steps are something that you can go through and adapt to your organization's specific budgeting process. And the first step is really the preparation. And that's something that if you've already been building an IT budget each year, you may have already been doing these steps without necessarily realizing it. If you haven't put an IT budget together before, then these are some of the things that you can do to get all the information that you need to put together an accurate budget. So the first step, preparation, start with an assessment. Understand what it is that you have as an organization, pull together an inventory of all of your equipment, particularly your laptops and workstations that your staff are using. You want to inventory all the different information systems that you're using. Do you use Microsoft 365 to communicate? Do you use Google Workspace email for communication? Are you using Slack for chatting? Do you use Zoom for your meetings? Do you use Teams? Just list all of that out so that you understand the specific IT systems that are being used by the organization. Different ways that you can get that information. You can send a survey out to your staff. You can just ask people, if you're a small enough organization, what is it that they're using. But getting that comprehensive list together in advance is really helpful. You do want to look at your previous IT spend. That's not always a great guide as to what you should be spending in future years, but it can also help you with assessing your existing IT infrastructure. And then finally, you want to look at your overall business plan. So your organization's plan. What is the organization going to do over the coming year, 1 to 3 years, really? Does the organization have plans for growth? Is it going to be expanding into new markets, new regions? Is it going to be adding new programs? Is there a large grant that you're going after that you have a good sense that you're going to get that will allow you to do additional program work? All of those things are going to be important to incorporate into the budget for the coming year. So once you've assessed your existing systems, once you've looked at what you've been spending in the past, and once you've factored in the impact of the organization's overall plans, strategic plans for the coming year, then you can put together a draft budget. And we'll talk on the next slide about sort of a framework for thinking about different budget categories in your draft. Once you've drafted the budget, then you have to go through a prioritization process. And that's where you take what you'd like to do for the organization in terms of IT, and then balance that with what the organization's capable of. Because as we all know, nonprofits have resource constraints, and they can't always invest in all of the technology that they would like to. So prioritizing is a pretty critical part of the budgeting process. And then once that budget is completed and approved by the senior leadership, and in some cases by the board, the nonprofit board, then that budget can be used to develop a plan where you outline when the spending is going to happen. And that can help you with developing an IT roadmap, which is really useful for ensuring that your IT systems are set up and implemented in a way that benefits everybody and helps the organization. So let's talk a little bit about IT budget categories. I like to think of IT budget categories in these 4 different buckets. And I think this helps. You can take the assessment that you did, the inventory that you put together, and then categorize the different aspects of your IT into these different categories. So the first is personnel, and that's really who's providing the IT support for the organization. For larger organizations, you may have an in-house IT team, and their payroll costs would fit into that category. For smaller organizations, You may be outsourcing your IT to a third-party provider, and those costs would go under personnel as well. So it's essentially the cost of the staff that are required to keep IT running. The second category are hardware costs, which these days, especially with a lot of organizations working remotely, are generally workstation, laptop costs. If organizations are maintaining an office or thinking about going back into their office, it could include things like wireless access points, printers, copiers, audiovisual systems. Those are the sorts of things that fall into hardware. Software is essentially, these days, software is almost entirely in the cloud. There are some software applications that organizations still use that are installed locally, but there are licensing costs associated with those. So if you're using the Office desktop suite, there's a licensing cost associated with that you would want to make sure you're including in your budget. If you're using cloud-based infrastructure, such as Azure, if you're a larger organization, you would want to put that in this category as well. So there's been a sort of overlap between categories 3 and 4 as more and more software moves into the cloud and really becomes software as a service. But we think it's helpful to continue to categorize those expenditures as software expenditures. And then finally, there's services. And these are things like your internet service at your office. If your organization is providing stipends to staff to help cover some of the cost of their home internet if they're working from home, or their cell phone costs if they're using their cell phone for business, that would fall into this category, as well as other types of services costs. So in terms of prioritizing, this is a very simple, straightforward way of thinking about how to prioritize your IT expenditures. And it's sort of, the concept is sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you have to fulfill the needs at the bottom of the pyramid first before you're in a place where you can fulfill the needs higher up the pyramid. And at the base is the hardware. If the hardware for your staff isn't working, if the laptops are old and out of date, if you're not providing laptops for your staff, it's going to be very hard for them to do their work. So we recommend prioritizing the hardware refresh first and foremost in the budget. It's important to maintain your existing licenses. So that is also something that needs to be prioritized once you've spent on refreshing the hardware. And then once you've addressed your existing IT spending needs, then you can start to look at spending on new initiatives, new IT solutions, new software as a service, new security initiatives. But this is the basic approach that we take to prioritizing IT spend. So that's just a real quick overview of budgeting. We actually have a webinar on our website that spends a whole hour talking about budgeting, so you can find out more information there. And of course, we're available and happy to answer any questions at the end of today's webinar if you have more specific questions about IT budgeting.
Great, thank you, Johan. I know it's hard to just compact it, but you did a great job covering those that kind of the ideas of how to do a budget and include IT in it. Which is a good segue into long-term trends that we can expect over the next few years. And these are the types of trends that should guide some of your budget decision making. So how much are you going to be in the cloud? How much are people going to be working remotely? Those types of decisions for your long-term plan. And I would just want to mention here that if you have an IT director or a CIO or a CTO, then you may already be making a roadmap of your technology needs and strategizing those needs in your budgeting process. Community IT provides this service to our clients through an IT business manager, which is a fairly senior position that acts as a manager, basically. So they can act as an IT director for our clients, helping match those IT needs to your budget and your strategy. We also can help if on the help desk, if we're seeing like a bunch of a similar type of problem come in, maybe it's around hardware, then that's something that our IT business manager can help you or our clients work on strategizing budget so that we are addressing maybe hardware issues that are coming up again and again. So it's just a way to help our clients be forward looking and be taking a lot of this stuff into account when you're working on your budget and working on your IT. So now Johan and Matt are going to briefly review a couple of the areas where we've seen changes and where we're going to continue to see these trends.
So I think the big trend that we've seen over the past 2 years with the response to the COVID pandemic is around remote work. I think that was a big transition that a lot of organizations had to scramble for to prepare. I think as we kind of come out of the COVID kind of work remote model, we're seeing many organizations adopt a hybrid approach. But not everyone is going back into the office. Even organizations, I think, that have established return to work programs, I think, are having challenges with that adoption. I think we certainly see it with our organizations. The ones that have established the return to work, it's relatively limited, and I think staff have, in general, for a lot of the knowledge worker positions, have preferred to be at home, preferred to work remotely, and I think. We've seen organizations make that as a transition and adopt that as a virtual organization model, which I think carries with it a little bit of a different IT mindset than having an office with a physical space with all of the resources that go onto it. I think if you're an organization that's in that transition period as well, we've also seen that there's a lot of challenges in getting the office space ready for that return to work, as staff have been remote over the past 2+ years. And so a lot of the things that maybe were working or were set up and configured when people left now need to be refreshed or updated in order to support staff as they come back into the office. I think for us, we are fortunate in that a lot of our tools are work kind of cloud centric and cloud enabled. And I think especially as organizations become more distributed, making sure that the support systems are in place to support support the staff wherever they happen to be, whether physically in an office location or at their home or back and forth, is I think is a element that needs to be considered, and then making sure that your IT policies and procedures are in place to support that. So policies tend to be the last thing on everybody's list, but they are a critical resource when helping to define just what the expectations are, what resources are going to be provided to staff, and what the expectations are around the use of personal technology or organizational technology as well. And I think finally, the transition into a remote workforce has introduced some unique cybersecurity concerns as well. Kind of in the before days, whenever you came to the office behind a firewall, everything was relatively straightforward, and there wasn't a lot of migration of resources. Now the network perimeter is much more expansive, and so now instead of just considering, is the firewall at the office up to date? Do we have good practices and security procedures in place at our physical office location? Now the network security boundary is everybody in their home and their home office, and so are all of those firewalls up to date? Is there adequate internet? Is there adequate support? How are we ensuring the security of devices that that we can't really see or get our hands on? So it does require a change in mindset and the use of tooling to make sure that you can support organizations regardless of the location. And as Kara just chatted in, please feel free, if there's questions, go ahead and use the chat, and we'll have some time here at the end as we go through the presentation.
Johan, I think you wanted to talk about this slide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think, we've been big fans of the cloud over the last 10 years, really moving information into the cloud, having email hosted by Microsoft rather than in your closet at your office has been a huge improvement with regards to reliability and functionality. I think one of the challenges and opportunities really that's emerging with this shift to hosting information in the cloud is, well, it's a combination of things. For one thing, there's the question of integrating the data. So You may be using Microsoft for email communication. You may be using Slack for chatting, both internally and with external partners. And you may be using Salesforce to manage your fundraising database or provide for your case management system. And so you've got information in all of these different cloud-hosted systems. How do you connect them with one another? How do you integrate them so that the information can be put to better use? So this is a big challenge that we're seeing and we're starting to see more and more of, but it also creates an opportunity. Organizations that are able to integrate data across different systems are able to use it more effectively and report on it, combine it into reporting that can be delivered to funders and to the organization's board. So there's a lot of potential in getting a hold of data integration and being intentional about it. One of the other nice things about these new systems is the degree to which they can create automated workflows and the degree to which they can reinforce and support business process. And so you can set up and encode the process in the system so that if the process is basically being followed, by everyone in the organization. So that's a new feature that a lot of these systems are providing that organizations can use. One of the last two bullets on this slide are really interrelated. One of the challenges of having all of these cloud-based systems is you've got logins for all these different systems. You've got one login for Google, you've got another login for Slack, another one for Zoom, another one for Salesforce or Razor's Edge. That's a security risk because now you're maintaining multiple passwords for all of these different systems, but it's also a major inconvenience for staff. So single sign-on is something that's provided by Microsoft, by Google, by third-party providers such as Okta, and it can really help in providing a single interface for accessing all of these different systems. So that's a real trend. It's something we've seen a lot of organizations implementing. Creates greater security protections. It helps with provisioning, and it also creates an easier, more efficient way of logging into systems for the staff of an organization. So one of the other things that we've also noticed with our clients is the increased need for IT policies and procedures. And I think this is a reflection of the increasing importance of IT in the work that organizations do. And so having a good acceptable use policy that's part of the employee handbook, that's provided to staff on their first day, and that's maybe reinforced with staff over time, is really important in helping protect the organization from things like staff using organization devices for doing personal work, or perhaps using organization systems for storing personal information. So having a good acceptable use policy is really important. As Matt talked about earlier, more organizations are working remotely, allowing or requiring their staff to work remotely. Having a good remote work policy is really important. Specifying in a policy what constitutes a productive home and work environment is something that you want to state clearly for your staff. If you're going to allow staff to use their mobile devices to access work information, you also want to make sure that those policies are clear and that you've implemented the technology in a way that supports those policies. It's important to have a data protection policy, so having it clearly stated in writing that staff are not permitted to share information outside of the organization. It's very easy to do that these days, easier than it's ever been. And a lot of organizations just don't have that as a stated policy, so that if there ever are issues, they can't go back and say, well, we clearly stated that this is something that employees are not allowed to do. So, and that's just one example of a host of items that would be included on a data protection policy. Application management policy, who's responsible for creating and managing user accounts in the different applications. That's a security issue, it's a governance issue, and it's something that organizations should think about. If you're not sure where to start with some of these things, you can work with an outsourced IT support provider. Really good support providers are already thinking about these issues. They're not just fixing your IT solutions, they're helping you develop a holistic approach to managing IT. which is what all of these policies and procedures are really aimed at. Finally, we recommend that organizations have a disaster recovery plan, an incident response plan, and an IT support and training policy, so that these are things that also would inform the budget. Now, how much are you going to invest in a disaster recovery system? How much are you going to invest in cybersecurity? How much are you going to invest in providing IT support and training to your staff? These are all things that would get defined by the senior leadership of the organization, potentially in conjunction with the board. And then once defined, they represent they basically represent what the organization is committing to, and then that can be used to inform budget and investment. So
I would just say I wanted to piggyback on a little bit on the disaster recovery plan and incident response. I think, with so many resources moving out to the cloud, I think there's been some sense of it's, kind of out of sight, out of mind. The cloud provider must be taking care of it. And I think developing that disaster recovery plan is a really good exercise to help test some of those assumptions. What happens if your data gets corrupted in your cloud database? Like, are you able to recover it? How are you able to recover it? To what degree is that cloud vendor providing backups? How far back do they go? And then just run those as different scenarios to say, can we recover a corrupted file? Can we recover 1,000 corrupted files? Can we recover 50,000 corrupted records? What does that process look like to make sure that that expectation is set clearly and communicated well across the organization? So, some of the, what's old is new again. The deliberate care that you would take if that database or that file system was on-premise, I think still needs to be applied, even if the organization has moved a lot of those resources into the cloud and has all this great integration and workflow. Still make sure that those systems are tested and not just assumed.
I think that's a great point, Matt. And I think we have seen some of our clients that exercise of getting a committee together and creating that disaster response plan for their IT helps them, organize their thinking around it and their strategy toward it and how much they're going to budget to it. And also just having that list of phone numbers, like who do you call first? And then who do you call next? And that needs to be something that you can't respond to it if you're not prepared for it. Mm-hmm. So we're going to actually turn it over to Matt to talk a little bit more about fraud, cyber insurance, your nonprofit, and basic cybersecurity. And we have a poll. So I hope they can launch the poll. Matt, do you want to read what the options are?
Yeah. So Community IT, has been mentioned before. We run managed services for about 6,000 nonprofit staff. We categorize all of those security incidents that we see into an incident report. And so these are some of the types of incidents that we respond to. So we see instances of a compromised account. That's where somebody's user login to Google or to Microsoft or to Salesforce may be accessed by someone other than the intended user. We see organizations suffer wire fraud or some other financial loss, due to gift card buying. We see some organizations being targeted with what are known as advanced persistent threat actors. So those would be kind of nation state or state sponsored actors that are really interested in kind of getting in and understanding what an organization is doing, who the staff are interacting with. We still see some organizations experiencing option 4, kind of ransomware or other kind of malicious software. And if you've experienced something else, then you can go ahead and drop that into the chat. I think what we've seen is that over time, the number of cyber incidents that we're responding to is only increasing over time. That's backed up by some of the data we see from the FBI as well and other industry sources. And so this is a topic that is not getting better, unfortunately, but requires more care and attention. So so Johan, we got our results there. I think the results are public here. Great. So we see, folks having a broad range of responses. So I think
actually the people cannot see the results. So I think some people have dropped some in the chat, but actually, let me just go back a slide. So we had about 25% had compromised account. So somebody got access to one of your email accounts. We didn't have anyone responding about wire fraud, which is interesting. We just did a whole webinar last spring on wire fraud and how to protect yourself. Option 3, advanced persistent threat or spying. Got a couple of answers to that, a couple of ransomware attacks. And so I think you're going to talk a little bit about how to prevent that. And then some other dropping in the chat for the malware, supply chain attack, other IT incident, or not having had an incident. So.
So I think the nonprofit sector, we didn't ask this as a poll question, but this is some survey data that came out, I think, from N10. But many organizations don't know or don't have those policies in place that we talked about. I think at the time of the survey, about 74% of organizations had not implemented multi-factor authentication, which is an absolutely critical security control. If you are an Office 365 customer, Microsoft is going to force MFA by the end of September. So they're going to turn that on and enable security defaults. So if you've not implemented MFA already, that will be coming. Salesforce did that earlier this year. As organizations really react to these compromised accounts, and MFA is a great way to protect against that. We know many organizations are using unsecured wireless and Bluetooth devices. Again, I think in the rush to provide remote work resources, and not have firmly established policies, a lot of this has just been, getting people productive and getting to work. And now I think there's an acknowledgement that we need to provide better security controls and more effective protections for staff, regardless of their work location. And then tying that back to, I think, the openness that many nonprofit organizations have, that, anybody can access their data from anywhere and from any device. And again, I think there's a growing acknowledgement, specifically as we have a lot of staff turnover and transitions. If that remote staff person, synced your organization's Dropbox to their personal laptop and now they're gone, what risk does that present to the organization? So I think taking a clear view and doing some risk analysis on what is important to your organization or what could represent a security risk to your organization is a critical exercise. So let's talk a little bit about, I think speaking of kind of trends, is a real change in the landscape around cyber liability insurance. So, many organizations are getting this type of coverage, but what we've seen really in the last year is that there's been a pretty dramatic increase in the cyber liability underwriting requirements in terms of the controls that you need to have in place as an organization. And also the cost has really gone up dramatically. We did a webinar earlier this month where we worked with an insurance broker who talked about the increase in prices. And so they were seeing renewal rates, sometimes double, on average about 155% increase in cyber liability insurance coverage. So the costs are increasing and the requirements are becoming more stringent as well. They're looking for multi-factor authentication on all cloud systems. Anything that you can access remotely, the bad guys can too, so make sure that that is protected. The underwriters are looking for formal evidence of all of these policies that we talked about earlier. They are looking for backups in disconnected systems. Again, the bad guys can get in if they're doing, if they're hacking into your systems, they're pretty sophisticated and they will target backup systems first. So if those backup systems are accessible on the same network, you're using the same credentials as your production system, then that can be targeted as well. We're also seeing, I think this is a positive movement, but increase in security awareness training. I love all the tech tools that are available for organizations to purchase for spam filtering and device protection, but I think fundamentally the most important thing organizations can do is train and educate their staff. Most attacks are delivered through email and are trying to get, the bad guys are trying to trick people to take some action, to click on a link, to enter their password, to provide that next step of access for the adversary, who will then go in and try to buy those gift cards or open up a new bank account. So understanding the financial risk that organizations face and help connect the dots so that staff feel comfortable and knowledgeable whenever they can evaluate the emails that they receive is a great step to take. So as we talk about data in the cloud, I think this is a question that we get quite a lot, is that, which platform is more secure? Or I'm in the cloud, I'm secure, aren't I? But I think it's important to understand or acknowledge that any secure platform can be used insecurely. So if you're an organization that has HIPAA compliance, for example, you can go with all the big cloud providers. They will provide you compliance documents that they use and that their facilities observe. But if you're an organization and you give everybody admin rights to all the data in the organization, that's an example of insecure use of what could be a secure platform. So again, I think any platform can be used securely and any platform can be used insecurely as well. I think it's important to have that regular training, as we talked about before, to make sure that staff are aware and engaged and know what to do and feel comfortable talking to IT, as opposed to feeling bad and trying to kind of cover up their tracks if they did click on something or they did have some negative event happen. And then I would say, as we talked about, those passwords and the MFA requirement is absolutely critical to make sure that every system that you are accessing has a new unique password, because what we can see from the data is that once one username and password is compromised, then the adversaries will go and try that login on every other system that your organization may be using. So making sure that your accounts are unique and you're not reusing passwords is an important step to take. So as we wrap up some of the cybersecurity initiatives, I think just leave you with the 3 bullet points here as the trends that need to be in place at your organization: developing and implementing effective IT policies, making sure that your staff are trained and engaged, and then making sure that you've got multi-factor authentication enabled on any and all cloud accounts that you can access remotely are really the foundational steps that will make a meaningful difference in improving the cybersecurity at your organization.
Matt, we had a quick question in the chat about if you haven't received security training at your organization. Usually it really does come from the organization. It's not something that you can do on your own, but do you have any advice for someone of who they should talk to? Is that usually something you would ask at HR or your manager, or what would you advise?
Yeah, I would say typically we're seeing cybersecurity training come from the IT department, but I do know that many HR systems are now kind of building it in or including that as one of the options that is included with the online package, and it's included as part of a staff onboarding process in terms of the policies and procedures of the organization. So again, it with your organization, it depends. But I would say, probably IT first, and if they're not engaged, then HR would be the second place to go to look.
And we have some resources that we put here, and I've also been dropping a few in the chat as well to some resources on our site. So we have just a lot of free downloads. There's a couple of other resources here, but I want to make sure that we have enough time to get to questions at the end. So please put your questions in the chat and we'll see if we can answer them. But I want to give you guys a chance to move on to some of these ongoing changes that we're seeing and in operations, and that we expect to be part of the landscape for a while going forward. So if you want to talk a little bit more about those.
Yeah, and in the interest of time, I'm going to go very quickly through these remaining slides. Each one could probably be its own hour-long webinar, and in some cases it is, and you can check that out on our website. So I'll just talk briefly about each one of these, and if you have questions, if there's any additional questions you have about any of them, we'd be happy to get into it in more detail during the Q&A time. So one of the big questions that organizations have is whether or not they should go with Google Workspace or Microsoft 365. They're both excellent systems. Some are a better fit for some organizations. Some are a better fit for other organizations. And in some cases, organizations benefit from using both. So it's not an all or nothing question, and it's something that we'd be happy to help organizations think through in more detail. Similarly, organizations have a question of whether or not they should go with Windows or Macs or both. Both is an option. It does cost a little bit more to manage multiple systems, but there are good business reasons for doing that. So that's another example of a question that organizations might have. If you go with Windows, there's a great new technology from Microsoft called Microsoft Autopilot, which basically allows you to order your equipment from the manufacturer, whether it's Dell or Lenovo or a similar manufacturer, automatically assigned to your organization. And if you have everything configured properly in Microsoft Intune, then that brand new laptop, when it arrives, can be shipped directly to your staff, and it'll automatically configure itself out of the box. So that saves a lot of time with provisioning, and we've had a lot of success with Microsoft Autopilot. Apple Business Manager, Apple has a similar program with Apple Business Manager, where you can link any Macs that you order or iOS devices or iPad devices that you order with your organization. And then if you're using a mobile device management solution, you can also have that equipment automatically provisioned for your staff out of the box. So this is a great utility for organizations that are using a lot of Apple products, something that's definitely worth exploring in more detail.
Yeah, and I would just add, kind of add on here this. I think the idea is not, either or. You don't have to use Office 365 or Google. You don't have to use Mac or Windows. You can use both, and I think that's part of the trend that we're seeing with a lot of nonprofit organizations is that they're finding the best tools for their organization to use and kind of integration, as opposed to being really strict about the silos that they're putting folks in. And I think it's good to know that there are effective technology management platforms for both Windows and now for Mac OS as well. What we've found is that, again, we take a best of breed approach. You can't use tools that were designed to support Windows to support Macs. And so you may need to have some additional technology tools in place to support that. But you can certainly have Macs in your nonprofit organization, enterprise organization, if folks want them, if they're more productive using that platform. As opposed to just shunting them off into your creative department. So
many organizations are going officeless, but if you still have an office, most organizations that do are going serverless. So no matter what your size is, you probably don't need that server anymore, and it makes sense to look into migrating away from the server. So that's a real trend that we've noticed. One of the few things that servers were still needed for was managing printers. And, organizations would print through a print server. There are now ways to do printer management through a cloud interface. We use a solution called Printer Logic, which can be deployed directly to the laptop. It makes things a lot easier. You no longer need a server, and it will automatically add and remove printers based on which office you're in. So that's a really cool solution, and we're definitely seeing the entire IT environment go serverless. Finally, a quick word. Obviously, we're all aware of supply chain challenges. It's impacted all kinds of industries, including IT. We're actually entering a strange new era. There was a chip shortage you're probably aware of. We're actually now entering it seems like we're going to be entering a chip glut. Prices have really been dropping on things like GPUs. There's word that laptops are starting to, pile up in warehouses. It doesn't mean that the things are easier to order, though, because supply chain isn't just about chip manufacturing. It's the result of all kinds of impacts on what is a vast, very complicated and large global network around manufacturing and shipping. So our advice is plan as early as you can, place the order as early as you can, and prepare to be flexible. We've had situations where we've ordered equipment and it's taken months to arrive. We've had situations where we've ordered equipment. We're told it would take 6 months, and then it showed up the following month, and then we had to scramble to deploy the equipment. So it's not that there's a supply chain sort of shortage. It's that there's supply chain uncertainty. and it just requires a lot of flexibility and agility to work around.
But I feel like that last piece, Johan, when we talked earlier about the budgeting, is if you know what your hardware needs are for a year out, 2 years out, then you can order as soon as possible, hoping that you'll have them when you need them. So it's just something to be mindful about. So we had another question come in on the chat. Please, if people have questions, we love to take questions, so just put them in there. Cheryl asked, do you need a server for an external database?
I mean, the short answer is no. Many popular databases, I think Razor's Edge is probably a good example. Very traditional client server database used to be in your office on that server. They now have and have had for a while a cloud hosted version of that same system. So again, you can kind of do all the things you would expect to do, kind of directly in the cloud. There may be a need to have some additional data reporting capabilities, but in terms of running a physical server, that's not something that we see many organizations still doing. They're either using the software as a service provided by the vendor, or then supplementing that with some other cloud systems.
Yeah, I think one of the things we found is that the costs of buying a server, storing it, paying for the power, the internet, ongoing maintenance of the server, over 5 years, that those costs can get up into the $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 range. And so for the same price or less, you can just purchase a virtually hosted server with Amazon or Azure and not deal with all the physical headaches that go along with it, and in some cases save money. So we've found that moving everything to the cloud basically has made the most sense in most cases.
And I think that also reflects what we're seeing of people working from many different locations, like maybe in a hybrid office, maybe in an office, maybe in a shared space, like subletted office if people are downsizing, or working from a coffee shop or working from home, being able to have that access. There used to be a whole bunch of different hoops you had to jump through to be able to get into a server. And now I feel like with everything on the cloud, it's a lot more. I mean, Matt, you talked about multi-factor authentication and making sure those logins are secure. But if you have a secure login and you can work in the cloud, then you really can work from anywhere, which is we're seeing a lot of.
Mm-hmm.
So do people have more questions? I want to make sure that we have time for questions. Kara, I don't know if you have more stuff that you need to say. You have all of our contact information is here. And I believe we're sending out an email after this to all the registrants where you can get back in touch with us and get more information from us.
Yes, that is correct. We will have a follow-up email with recording and everything. So that'll be all taken care of for the attendees. We do have one more question that did come in from Leah. She asked, can you share a sample of an IT policy document?
I can take that. Hold on, I'll have to grab the link, but I will share that in the chat.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, we have about like 2 more questions. Oh, we have another question coming in. Let's see, Margot asked a question too. Do you have a good resource for informing a very small shop of IT options that can help with productivity? We don't even know what's out there that might help us. For example, integrating CRM platforms with other software applications, or helping with managing social media. Well, I think like for even like social media, if you don't, you can use something like we use like Loomly in our with our organization. There's a lot of platforms out there that you can use. CRM, I guess. Do you all have any examples or anything to share on that?
Yeah, a resource that you may already be familiar with, but that we really like a lot, and I'll send it out in the chat, is TechSoup. And they offer courses. They have a lot of free online material, and their mission basically is to help nonprofits of all sizes, but particularly small nonprofit organizations with their technology capacity. And so that's a good resource. For an organization of your size that's very small, you might be able to find a volunteer who could provide you with some advice, or an independent consultant, I think tends to make the most sense for really small organizations, and just sort of getting started, getting their feet on the ground when it comes to IT.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Cheryl asked another question too. She asked, we have a database that we can log in from anywhere, but we were told to buy a new server to fix the issues when having what they have been experiencing with it. Do you have any suggestions on cloud-based databases where client worker interactions can be recorded?
Yeah, that's a.
I was going to say, I think probably what I would respond there is that I wouldn't just kind of do what you're doing now and kind of move that system either to a brand new server or kind of a hosted database in the cloud, but I would really look at what are your organization's requirements, and is there a software as a service application that can meet your requirements? Because I think particularly on that auditing and logging and reporting side, like unless you have a lot of really sophisticated tools, it's hard to do that with a database that you have, kind of on a server in your office. And so cloud databases like Salesforce or, Dynamics are really built with a lot of that auditing and reporting built right in, and then you don't have to take all of those additional steps. And so that can be a much more affordable way to get, a high quality and sophisticated database platform.
I just wanted to jump in. I put another resource in the chat, and we can maybe send it out on how to hire an outsourced IT provider and some good questions to ask. So that might be helpful to you if you're contemplating a big project, or if you're being told by your current provider, like, you need to do this big project, if you want to have some ideas of how to get a second opinion.
I just saw a question from
Awesome.
Lucinda. Do we have time to answer her question?
Yeah, sure. I mean, people are kind of jumping off because I think it's a little bit over time right now, but yeah, we can answer.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Kara. I appreciate it, because it's an excellent question. And Lucinda asked, do you have any recommendations for non-techie people to evaluate proposals about technical issues, or even candidates for tech type positions? And I think this is something we feel very strongly about at Community IT, that anyone who's delivering IT as a service has to be able to explain it in terms that the average business manager or leader, nonprofit manager or leader can understand. So if you're getting a proposal from someone and you don't understand it, go back to them and ask them to explain it to you. And if they can't, then you probably don't want to work with them anyways. So don't be afraid to ask questions. There are no dumb questions when it comes to IT. And if you're not getting the answers that satisfy you, that's not your problem. That's their problem. And you need to find a new provider to talk to. We've worked with hundreds of nonprofits. Most of the nonprofits we work with have no tech background. And over time, we're able to, at the end of the day, it's their decision to make about technology. And it's our job to empower them to make that decision effectively.
Awesome. I think that's all that we have time for right now, just to respect everybody's time and the attendees' time and everything. But if y'all have any additional questions, we will be available you can email us. You can see everybody's emails here on this slide. There'll be a follow-up email going out too, so feel free to reply to that email too if you have any additional questions as well. Thank you all again so much for this awesome presentation and great information. A lot of people are really, I can see in the chat, they're thinking about ways that they can incorporate this information they learned. So thank you all so much, and we hope to see you again on next webinar Wednesday. Take care.